one of these organizations has to measure what we do, right? We'll have to figure out if what we're doing is actually helpful, what our outcomes are, if we can be more efficient, if we maybe need to increase what we do, maybe we need to curtail some of our activities so that we're more effective with our core activities. So what we're going to do, we're going to change the slide presentation. So we're going to talk about evaluations, and this is something that when I was taking the VMTS, Scott's program really impressed me. His presentation on evaluations really impressed me. I soon figured out that evaluating what we do as volunteer administrators and evaluating our programs, evaluating the perspectives of what people think about our programs is really important. And I began the process of learning volunteer administration at my particular role, Clarehouse. In discovering what that role entails and discovering what our agency does, I learned that it was going to be really important for me to understand what it's all about for the people that we serve, how are we impacting their lives, what are the outcomes in their lives. I learned it was really important for me to understand what my boss thought about our role, as well as my role as a volunteer administrator. I learned it was really important to discover what the board of directors thought about it. I learned it was really important to understand what my peers think about it, because we work with peers all the time by throwing volunteers at problems, or actually trying to create solutions to those problems by enabling volunteers to participate in creating those solutions. So I learned a lot during the first 2 or 3 years, and in the third year I decided I would do what we call a 360-degree evaluation. Now this is an old technology, so to speak, but that kind of fits with Clarehouse. One of the things we do is we provide what we call low-tech, high-touch. The 360-degree evaluation has been used for over 20 years. And what happens when you have a process out there that long, excuse me, when you have a process out there that long, it begins to develop critics. Thank you very, very much. Ah, wonderful. It begins to develop critics. So evaluating performance standards and evaluating how our activities measure up to performance standards are really important. There's a number of ways to do evaluations. This one provides a panoramic view of what people think about our performance and the outcomes that we provide. So, a 360-degree evaluation is a method of systematically collecting opinions about a program's effectiveness from a wide range of stakeholders. This includes peers, subordinates, volunteers, the population that we serve, our direct supervisor, executive management or the executive director, and the board of directors. Now in my case, my direct supervisor is the executive director. You probably all have a similar relationship. There are times when volunteer administrators, between the volunteer administrator and the executive director or the executive management, there may be another level. So we're going to talk about that as well. Why would you want to perform this kind of evaluation? There's 2 primary reasons that these kind of evaluations are performed. Number 1, they're used to develop an effectiveness appraisal of the program. And number 2, they're used for program development. Now these 2 have 2 distinct different purposes and 2 distinct different operation techniques. Let's talk about it as a program appraisal tool. As a program appraisal tool, the 360-degree evaluation puts an emphasis on the assessment of the performance of the program. Participation, it generally comes from an executive director or the board of directors, or generally some kind of a process in the funding of the program or the outcomes of the program is being reviewed. whether it's for good or bad, but generally this kind of a performance appraisal is brought out by the executive management or by the board of directors. So here's what it looks like. When the executive director says, I want this done, then participation is compulsory. Everybody's going to participate who the executive director chooses. The executive management selects the respondents. They control the access to the report. They decide who gets the information. They are generally trained to interpret results and give feedback, or they pay someone or find a professional that can help interpret those results and provide feedback. And the outcome is an agreement with all parties concerned in the evaluation on the assessment of the performance, and it sets targets for improvements of the program. Now, if we use this kind of an evaluation as a development tool, it generally comes from the not the executive director, but the volunteer administrator, because they want to see how they're doing. They want to see how they can improve the program. What's the strengths? What's the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? This is a great way to do a SWOT analysis. So program development is the priority. In other words, program improvement. Participation is usually voluntary. What do we do as volunteer administrators? We recruit, train, and place, motivate volunteers. So the program administrator selects the respondents. We send out the invites for people to attend to, or we send out the surveys for people to fill out. The volunteer administrator or the program administrator controls the access to the report. They acquire support to interpret results and make conclusions. In other words, they may find funding to pay someone to do it or find someone who can volunteer to do it. And the outcome of this evaluation is a development plan, which is also a plan for improvement for the program. So, how does this kind of an evaluation benefit the organization? Well, first of all, let's talk about stakeholders. Who is a stakeholder in your organization? Anybody?
Donors.
Donors?
Clients.
Clients, those we serve. Okay. Who else?
Volunteers.
Volunteers, staff. I heard someone say staff. Who else?
Board members.
The community, the board of directors. There's a couple more people I can think of.
Did we say administrator?
We said other peers. We could say administrator, other peer administrators. Who else? Good morning. Brenda said donors, but even donors can fall into different categories, like foundations or businesses, exactly. Individuals, people who can come in at different levels and different levels of participation. So what this does, this kind of an evaluation, if it's used correctly, we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls in just a minute. But if it's used correctly, it improves cohesiveness of an organization by revealing all the stakeholders' perspectives. Now, why is that important? Why would you want to know all the stakeholders' perspectives? We just named off a whole bunch of different people. Why? Name a group and tell me why their input's important.
Staff may be thinking everything's okay, and the clients are going, what is going on here in this place? Two different perspectives.
Right.
Well, in turn, the board of directors may think, because they're the ones that are responsible for keeping the doors open, may feel that something's not right, but they can't put their finger on it, but that other information will give them an idea of what's going on from everything. Like you said, from the SWOT, the negatives, the positives, external and internal both.
Exactly. So I'm experiencing, I'm on a learning curve here, and as we all are. But one of the things that has become really aware, well, I've become really aware of recently, is the fact that major funders want to know what your next step is. They want to know, what are you going to do next? What are your plans for the future? What's your agency going to look like 5, 10 years down the road, or even next year? So one of the things I'm learning is that donors and major funders really want to have an input and a say in what's going to happen in the future. And that perspective is extremely important. So This kind of an evaluation also helps individual team members, as individuals, understand what's going on. It helps the team as a whole create that cohesiveness, and it helps the program. The benefit of collecting data in this kind of an evaluation, sorry about the typo, is that the person gets to see a panorama of perceptions rather than just self-perception or the supervisor's perception, which affords a more complete picture. Now, when we're involved in any kind of evaluation, what are we trying to do? Learn, adapt, and
Improve.
decide how we're going to implement change. So you don't want, well, in some cases, if you're focusing on a specific thing, you want to use tunnel vision, right? But if you want to look at the overall perspective of everyone's view of the program, you need this panoramic kind of a view. So we'll talk about how this is developed. How does it work? Well, as in any kind of an evaluation program, you're going to define performance standards and that you're currently operating under, or performance standards that you want to try to reach. And then you want to set goals. You want to choose a method. There are different kinds of methods of performing a performance evaluation survey. You can look at past performance. You can send out surveys. But with a 360-degree evaluation, what you want to do is you want to get everybody involved. You want to send out a survey, which is, and here's the hard part, which is easy for people to answer and yet provides accurate feedback, accurate data. And not only does the data need to be accurate, but it needs to be informative. It needs to be helpful. We'll talk about structuring questions here in just a few moments. So the method can be used as on the internet, it can be sent out in the mail, you can post it on Facebook. It depends on who, and Twitter, it depends on who you want to reach, what's their method of being reached, and how do you want to reach them. So you want to ensure the collection method addresses performance standards that we set in that first bullet point. And we want to ensure that the use of this information meets the standards and goals. And you want to choose as wide a range of respondents as possible to get a good global picture. Now, how is it designed? These are the 7 points that we're going to break down and talk about individually in just a few minutes. So, the supervisor and or the executive director must be involved. They're the people that are going to help you interpret the results and set new performance standards when the time is done. Questions have got to be specific, and you've got to ask about measurable actions. When we talk about measurable actions, I'm going to throw a question out here on a couple slides further down. But, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you a question. What is a measurable action that you would like to know more about in your organization?
Total number, it's real important to know, for me to know the total number of clients that I'm serving per volunteer ratio.
Okay.
I mean, I have several different programs. I need to know how many clients I've actually reached in each one of my different programs.
So that kind of result has to fit into a matrix. Is that right? And I'm guessing that matrix gives you information that you have to report to different funders, maybe because of Medicare funding.
All I have to do is report a total percentage. I just have, my ratio, my reporting is basically a number percentage. So I get a number of hours per month that our staff has provided to all of our clients. I know how many volunteer hours I have and I do percentage, but for me, that's just a number. I want to know, I want to look at the end of the year, I want to look at how many actual lives I touched. And that's a measurable thing for me.
Okay.
But I don't have to report it to anybody, because nobody cares about that, they just care about a number.
Okay.
I'm still working on them, I mean.
So let me ask this follow-up question then.
Yeah.
You developed this matrix. You know how many volunteers you have per client that you serve, or how many clients you serve you have per volunteer. If that number is too large, does your service quality decrease?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I think
But
it,
how do you know?
That's the next question. How do you find that out?
basically by a lot of research, by keeping track of things, you know, and because the clients come and go so quickly with us, then it's hard to keep up with them, so. And it's not in our survey questions. They go out to the families afterwards, you know, it's, because I don't have any control over that. You know, a lot of the stuff is just, well, that's not really nice. We need to start taking steps as an organization to move forward in our thinking.
Okay.
We've gotten stale in our thinking because we do everything by the way it's always been done, you know?
That's an excellent point. And when you say those last words in that sentence, that's the way it's always been done. That may not always be the way to do it.
No.
And because of, in different situations, reporting changes, laws change, our requirements change. So a lot of things have to be adapted to change. We're going to talk about that next month. Comments are to be constructive and not personal. Comments that are put back, that are returned with the survey or with the questionnaire are to be constructive and not personal. We'll talk about that. There must be a plan to act on the feedback. If a survey is sent out, you receive feedback. If that is not acted on, why would you waste the time and money to do the evaluation in the first place? The feedback must be reviewed periodically. You want to come back to it. Responses must be confidential. And you've got to build on this, when the feedback comes back, you've got to build on the strengths first and then work on weaknesses. We'll talk about that as well. So, a supervisor and an executive director must be involved. Whatever the executive director gives attention or importance to gets attention in my organization. Does it do that in yours? And the staff seems to pay attention and follow along. Good morning. Welcome. I believe that this kind of appraisal or program development tool affects outcomes will help make the process successful. So, let's talk about it from the two different perspectives that we mentioned earlier. Are we going to use this as a performance appraisal or as a program performance assessment, or are we going to use it as a development tool? So if the executive director is involved, as they should be, and this is designed to be a program performance assessment or appraisal, what kind of a role do you want to play in that? What kind of a role does the volunteer administrator want to play in that? Just give me just throw out some ideas.
First of all, we want to be at the table.
Right, John?
I was just going to say, we want to have input into what is being asked and that kind of thing. But then kind of, from my perspective, a no role at all until it's time to look at results again. Let the executive director take the lead.
Good answer. So if this is a performance appraisal, you want to have some say in what you're going to evaluate and how it's going to be evaluated. You want to do what the executive director says, fill out the survey as you see it, do your self-assessment. But you want to back off, and you want to let that executive director take that leadership role. And frankly, there's a lot of us that have a difficult time with that because maybe we've got a influential personality. In other words, we may be a little pushy. Or maybe we want to just, monitor it real closely so that sometimes we think it might get out of control. So we've got to deal with those feelings as well. But then when the results come back, we really would like to be involved in knowing how they were interpreted by others and maybe have a little influence on how those results are interpreted. So now if we look at it from the other point of view, as we mentioned earlier in one of the first couple of slides, if we use this as a developmental process, how do you want to be involved? You probably, if you want to develop a 360-degree evaluation to help develop your program and improve your program, you probably want to be the leader in that, don't you? Is there a time when you would ever appoint or ask someone else to take the lead? I can think of one example.
Maybe if you don't physically have time to do this on top of your other duties, it wouldn't make sense to water down what you're doing that you need to do continually.
That's a good point. Or if you don't want the results to appear to be biased.
I was gonna say, if you're looking to see how people feel exactly about how your performance is, yeah, you would probably want somebody else to take the lead on that, because when you're writing the questions, they would be geared towards giving you the positive reinforcement that you wanted.
Exactly, and that's going to create bias. And one of the things you don't want to do when you're doing an evaluation, especially something that gives you a panoramic view, you really don't want it to be biased. Now, when you're doing this evaluation, we'll talk about developing questions in just a second, but when you're doing this evaluation, this kind of an evaluation, you're really trying to find out people's overall opinions. Now, Clarehouse did a 360-degree evaluation of the volunteer program. We concluded it in December. And then we looked over the evaluations, looked over the feedback, and developed new goals and changed a few things in our program. But another opportunity appeared to me. And if I am to do this over again, and I probably will do another big evaluation like this in a couple of years, I'm going to really be careful about how the questions are written so that we don't bias people's opinions. And that's the hardest thing about the whole process, is not inviting people to participate, because if you do this properly, when you invite people to participate, they're going to say, yeah, I'd love to help you make this a better program. I'd love to help give you some input on how to make this more effective. But writing those questions is so vitally important. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here we go. Now, we're going to spend a little time on this. Questions must be specific and ask about measurable actions. We talked about measurable actions a few minutes ago. Specific questions that can be measured are more powerful. For example, here's 3 examples of questions. And each question gets progressively more specific. Now, you can overdo it, but these are 3 good examples. A good question that gives you some general information is, volunteers assist me in achieving my daily objectives. Now, this might be a question you'd send out to your executive director, but it would be a really good question to send out to staff member or peers, because you want to know how well your volunteer program, how well your volunteers are assisting the overall organization in achieving its objectives. So you've got strongly agree, no difference, disagree, strongly agree. Sorry, it's a little bit crowded in here. I want to get more on this slide. Now, a better question would be a little bit more fine-tuned and specific. Volunteers improve the quality of care we provide to our guests. Now, talking about this from a Clarehouse perspective, and is when I was developing this kind of a question that went out to my peers and to the staff, this is exactly the progression I went through to develop this particular question. Now, there were 10 questions on the survey that went out to peers and staff. There was a different survey that went out to board of directors and executive directors. And there was the same survey went out to a few donors, but they received 1 extra question. We'll talk about that in just a minute. The best question in this particular example was volunteer caregivers. That is a position that we have at Clarehouse. So we've identified a position and a group of people that we want to see how they're doing. Improve the quality of care by offering the same care as staff members. Now, in that question, there's a little bit of bias. I want to talk about that in just a second. But what happens when the question is intended to be kind of a compliment to the staff members, because I want them to feel positive about answering this question. So I say, volunteer caregivers improve the quality of care by offering the same care as staff members. So I'm kind of making the staff members feeling like they're a little elevated. You know, they do a good job. It seems like there's a compliment that's built into this. I guess it could be taken the other way as well, but let's say, what I'm trying to measure here is what the staff member and what our peers, especially the clinical director who's in charge of our guest care and our guest staff, I really want to know what those people think about the job that volunteers do. So that's why the question is a little more specific. I probably could have made it even more specific, but when you get in data mining, if you drill down too deeply, then once again you get tunnel vision. And the idea of this kind of an evaluation is get someone's overall perspective. So you got to find that balance between getting the panoramic view and getting information that is actionable and measurable. So in this question, and I left an S out, sorry. In this question, the way the comments are answered tells me a lot. There may be some times when someone's upset about a problem. And I can say, well, you may get, not only do you ask this question, but you say, you leave a comment space below underneath it. So leave about 3 lines that are easy to write on or type into. And you're going to get some good comments occasionally. You won't get a lot. Probably out of the 15 surveys that were returned from care staff and from my peers, 2 people made comments. So that's about a 10 to 12% return rate on comments. But this question was answered in each case. Now, the 2 people that returned comments were both positive comments. One of them was a positive comment that was actually constructive. And the response was something like, I can't read it, can't remember it verbatim, but the response was something like, volunteers do a great job in helping me assist guest care. It can be improved by further training. And so I got some feedback there, but guess what I'm going to do? How am I going to give further training to those volunteers? Because I'm not involved in guest care. I don't have time to go down and show volunteers how to provide the proper care. I'm going to go back to the clinical director and I'm going to say, you know, here's some feedback that I received. I don't know who it came from, but it was really constructive. And I'd like to know if you think it's important enough that we give them more training, and what would that training look like? So we've gotten feedback, we've interpreted that feedback, and now we're looking for results and how to measure in those measurable actions. Now, finally, the purpose of the evaluation is to measure and improve the program, not to target someone. So if you get a comment back and you're doing this kind of an evaluation, you get a comment back that seems like a kind of a personal target or a personal affront, that can be read and processed, but maybe not included in the entire data. If the person in charge of the program is underperforming, the process will bear that result without a direct personal attack anyway. So if I'm evaluating this program, or my executive director is doing this as a program evaluation or assessment or appraisal, the executive director is going to determine if I'm doing a good job or if the program is underperforming without someone providing a personal attack. And I didn't get any personal attacks, but one of the comments was directed at a volunteer. Any questions about that? That's a lot of material on that screen. Comments? 3.
Mike, do you suggest that when you're starting to write your questions, you go through a process of writing the question? I mean, it's like you got the good, better, best. So do you suggest just writing the question as you think it in your head to begin with, and then go back and evaluate whether how it can be improved before you put it out for final judgment?
I'm glad you brought that up. And it's something I should have put on the screen or in the next slide, and I didn't do it. I actually had a volunteer who has a master's degree in business administration, comes in and helps me a couple of days a week, and I developed these questions. on all the surveys, and then I had her take a look at it, and I said, how would you improve on this? I want measurable results. And so, yeah, you want to get other people involved in building the survey and developing the questions. Because, like, if you're wanting a true 360-degree evaluation, you want a broad panoramic view of what people think of your program and what they think can be done to improve it and how it's performing. And so the questions are very important. As I say, there's a balance between getting too specific and getting that panoramic view. So I chose someone who could actually help me develop the questions as well. I strongly encourage you to get a volunteer to help you develop that. Good question. Okay, then there's got to be a plan to act on the feedback. An evaluation tool is only as good as the plan in place to improve the program. So remember the first slide, we talked about how to set standards and goals for the evaluation. The evaluation tool has got to conform to those standards and goals. We've got to interpret the information that we receive in light of those standards and goals that were set. Many evaluations simply give feedback, and many organizations, I've seen it with, especially, I don't mean to pick on anybody in particular, so I won't, but I've seen faith-based organizations that do ministry evaluations, and what do they do with it? They give it to the executive pastor, or they give it to the priest in charge, or they send it on upstairs to the diocese or whatever, and it's kind of forgotten. You know, it gets put on some busy person's table and sits there, and finally, after a few months of sitting there on the desk, it gets slid off into the trash can. Nothing ever happens. So at the very beginning of this any kind of an evaluation, you've got to decide how the feedback is going to be used and what's going to be done with it. A plan has to be in place. If there's no plan to act, there's no need for an evaluation. Don't waste your time or your money. I was listening to NPR yesterday, and it just struck me when I was preparing for this. There was a gentleman who's walking from Dallas to Tulsa, and he's putting flags down every mile, is it? And he's putting the names on the flags of firefighters who died in the tragedy of 9/11. And when they asked him why he was doing that, he said, well, I'm just trying to raise awareness of what's going on. Well, that's good. That's an honorable goal. But I don't want to, if I'm doing an evaluation, or if I'm trying to get something accomplished, I don't want to just raise awareness. I want to change something. And believe it, anybody can tell you this, executive directors especially, they want to know the impact, they want to know what's your outcome going to be, because they've got to report that to funders, right? Funders want to know, okay, I want to know what I'm getting from my dollar. How am I affecting the public? What is your agency doing to improve the lives of those you serve? So this is really important that you have a plan to improve the program. And that this feedback and the report doesn't just get laid off in the trash somewhere after a couple months. So feedback has to be revisited. Periodic follow-up must be planned. We may recognize the need to improve the program, but actually changing behavior is difficult. And we must be reminded regularly. It also helps us to know, even informally, how perceptions have been changed. So, how many of you guys have ever in your life tried to change your behavior in some way? Stopping smoking, losing weight, getting some exercise on a daily basis. I remember, as a child, Mom trying to adapt my behavior in different ways. Then it was a daily thing, you know. With the grandchildren that we are involved with in my home, changing that 7-year-old's behavior on getting the trash into the trash can every day, taking the trash out once a week and getting it out to the street, which is his chore, you know, it is a constant thing. You've got to always be evaluating. And truthfully, how different are we at 47 or 37 or 27 than a 7-year-old? Truthfully, our behavior is difficult to change. So we need to revisit this feedback periodically, compare our progress. Anyway, it's also helpful to know even informally, how perceptions have changed. So I'm sitting in my desk about 2 weeks ago, starting to prepare for this presentation. I pull out that 360-degree evaluation. I'm looking through it, and I see something that just jumps out on the page at me, and I'm thinking, you know what? We measured this, and I haven't done anything about it. It was about getting more feedback from volunteers and what they think about it. One of the volunteers' answers to the survey, to his survey, was, you need to send us more surveys. You know, you're not asking us enough what we think and how we want to be involved and how we think your program should be changed and structured and so forth. And I realized that I hadn't done anything like that in about 3 months. Scott?
It just goes to show that stakeholders want to be involved. They may not realize it until it's right in front of their face, or you make it active where they can participate and include themselves in. But people really do want to be involved in any stakeholder within the program or the entire organization itself, want to be a part of this. They may not realize it initially, but that just, it bears fruit right there.
Absolutely.
You're not sending us enough stuff, include us more,
Yeah.
we want to give our opinion. That's the best thing you could ever want versus them wanting to say, well, I don't care, I want to stay silent.
Right.
So that's a great problem to have.
That is a great problem to have. There's two things that you really don't want. You don't want a non-answered survey, and you don't want a survey that comes back that says everything's strongly agree or excellent or you have a wonderful program, thanks for including me. You know, those kind of things make you feel good, but they don't give you the results that you need to improve yourself. Thanks, Scott. Good comment.
I think that's also in evaluations that to truly give 360 at some level is you also ask the negative.
Yeah.
What has been positive about your interaction with blah, blah, blah? What has been negative about your, and give them place to mark so that they can write that in, because you want to hear, oh, everything's great, everything's great, everything's great.
They don't know about it.
Every time I say this, nobody listens. That's the one I want to hear.
Yeah. Interesting. All the responses that I got back from the board of directors, all of them said, great program, love what you do,
Keep it up.
keep it up, doing a good job, except one. And the one board director who answered and left a really good comment said this. She said, I'm worried that you're overworking volunteers. Now,
We appreciate the caring.
yeah,
That's so nice to hear.
yeah.
Thanks for your caring.
So that really stunned me that I received that answer, because one of the things that's built into our program is that I limit the number of hours that volunteers do. We have a tremendous emotional buy-in to our agency, and volunteers just jump at us and say, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, and I go, whoa, 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 stop. You know, let's decide what you're good at, let's decide what you want to do, and let's keep you interested by, not wearing you out. And so that's always been a goal of measurement in my program, or in the program. And so when this feedback came back, I actually went to that board. She signed it. So you never ask. We're going to talk about confidentiality. So I actually went to that board member and I said, I appreciate that feedback. Why is it that you think we're overworking? I mean, we dealt with that personally on a one-to-one basis. But I was glad that she signed it. Responses must be confidential. Duh. Always ensure the respondents that their answers will always remain confidential, not just from the initial evaluation, but when you revisit that feedback quarterly or monthly or however you look at it, months later during follow-up meetings, confidentiality is as important as it was during the process and the initial review. So here we are 9 months later after doing the evaluation and looking at the results of the volunteer program at Clarehouse. And when I sit down with the executive director or one of my peers and I look at feedback again, I want to make sure that I'm still not mentioning anybody's name that gives me information, like that board member who signed her evaluation. People have to know about their confidentiality of their answers right up front, during the evaluation process, and as you go back and look at the feedback. or you're going to get biased results. Have a good one. So, final slide in how this is designed. Build on your strengths first. Then work on the weaknesses. Now, why would you want to do that? Strengths of a program are what propelled it to the current position of funding, or respect, or positive impact that it enjoys now. And we're going to assume that your program is doing something positive now, and that it's effective, and it's working properly. Identify, rely on, and build on those strengths. If there's any way those strengths can be highlighted, improved, streamlined, you'll find that out. Hopefully in this kind of an evaluation, you'll get good results back. Then you look at your weaknesses. Weaknesses need to be transformed in order to improve a program. Now, all you guys know your program very well. Does anybody want to throw out a weakness that you think your program can improve upon? It's confession time. If you don't, I've got one. Go ahead. Scott.
The numbers bear fruit regardless of how hard we try or everything at the PAC. We consistently fill about 80% of our overall slots available for shows. Some sub-seasons are better than others, but in general and on average, there's 80% fill rate. And the over minimums, and the minimums is what I care about. Are we covering at least the minimum needs overall for our theaters? And that'll range anywhere from 10% to up to 40%, depending on those numbers. And you can't max out any higher than pretty much 40% above minimums, just based on how the numbers play out. So that is a continual quote-unquote weakness, but we've done better. We've raised the numbers up, or we're consistently in the teens up to maybe 25% over minimums, but we're still filling around 80 to 82% of our overall slots for volunteers to be able to plug in. So I would love to be able to increase that number.
You know, if you're filling 80% of your volunteer roles that are needed, and yet that's what I'm hearing, right?
Right.
That's an incredibly high number. Because I know at Clarehouse, for example, we have some roles that are overfilled.
Right.
People have a lot of interest in some roles. We have other roles that go begging. So overall, we're probably not at 80%. So I think 80% is an incredibly high number. But I, like you, want to improve those numbers as well. So that's something that would be measurable. What's the feedback from your board of directors, your executive director, your self-assessment, your volunteers, your staff, your peers? What's the feedback from those folks on how those numbers can be improved? It's a great thing to point out. However, zeroing in on weaknesses and not identify and discovering how you can build on your strengths and using them to destroy a program, a good program. Guys, it's not that I can't spell, it's just that I can't read.
All our programs are godly programs in their own way.
Aren't they though?
You didn't do anything wrong on that.
Good programs. You've got to develop the strengths, you've got to build on those strengths. Weaknesses are important to identify and define how to improve, but don't just focus on the weaknesses. There's a balance that has to be there as well. Okay, pitfalls. I put this slide up here, I thought it was kind of clever. Well, one of the things that can happen when a 360-degree evaluation, the number one problem with a 360-degree evaluation is that people begin pointing the finger at other people. If you let it get out of control and you don't present the initial survey and the follow-up feedback reviews in a way that you build on those strengths and identify and try to improve weaknesses, then you're going to get people pointing the finger at everybody else. Oh, well, the clinical director is going to say, well, that's the problem, and it's his problem, and he needs to fix it. The administrative director is going to say, well, that's her problem, she's got this issue, and she needs to fix that. So it becomes a finger-pointing presentation. Very important that on your cover letter that the survey gets, and by the way, when you send out a survey, you do send a little, even if it's email or faxed or Facebook, you give a little, at least a paragraph on the purpose of the survey, right? And the results that you want to try to glean from that survey. And you want to let people know in one way or another that the information you want back needs to be constructive information. It can be critical, but it needs to be constructive as well. That's the number one pitfall of a 360-degree evaluation. But now, if you get that kind of feedback from this evaluation, though, what does that tell you? It tells you that there may be a deeper problem in your organization, that there may be conflict, and maybe this is something that the ED needs to know about so that the ED can begin to work on team building and cohesiveness and that sort of thing, which we talked about in one of the first slides. So even though this can be a pitfall, it can also be something that can be used to improve the organization as well. It may be identified as a weakness that needs to be improved. The second thing that's a pitfall with this kind of an evaluation, or really any kind of an evaluation, is its design. If it's not well designed in the beginning, you get information back that's not helpful, it's not measurable, it can be biased. So you want to make sure that you're developing the right kind of information, the right kind of questions in the first place. Those are the two major pitfalls. There are others, but I won't go into a whole lot of detail unless someone has another idea that they want to throw in there. Okay. Final slide. What do you do with the results? We've talked about reviewing them. We've talked about going over them. Let me ask you a question. If you were given an evaluation survey and you filled it out and sent it in, would you want to know the results of that survey? So in a 360-degree evaluation, where do the results go?
Should go back out to the stakeholders, the people who participated in the survey, because especially if you're looking on how to improve something, they need to see the overall things, so they don't get their finger pointed at them.
Exactly. Because if they're not already in that pitfall that you just pointed out, this kind of an evaluation can put them into that. So the information needs to be shared globally. Anyone who participated in the survey needs to have the results from the survey. So pick the people that are going to be useful and helpful in reformulating or helping you redesign the program or improve the program. And for example, if your ED is doing this for a program appraisal or a program assessment, you want to help them, like John said, you want to help them in the beginning. Select the questions and select the people who are going to be involved so that you get good information. Okay? The second thing I want to mention about program results is really important. Not only do you want to share those with the people who are involved, but the results of the 360-degree evaluation are, as I said, a panoramic. I use that word a lot this morning. But you want to take that panoramic picture, if you can, and develop into a new mission statement. Maybe not for your whole program, but a new mission statement for at least the improvement of the things that need working on. So it's kind of like you're evaluating, assessing, measuring, coming to conclusions, and now you've got a new mission that you've got to fulfill because of the results that you discovered in the evaluation. And one of those results may be that you want to do the evaluation again in 3 years and measure to see how the evaluation performed in the first place. Does that make sense? Okay. So, like Scott said, in the VMTS that I was involved in 2010, evaluation never stops. Measuring tools change. Measuring outcomes change. But evaluation, assessment, program development never stops.
Where's your Lion King music?
Say what?
Where's your Lion King music?
King music, yeah, exactly.
Very upset with you.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Brenda will sing Circle of Life. She's good at that.
I don't know the words to it.
I don't either, and I couldn't carry the tune if I was. Guys, thanks so much. That is the program presentation.
I have a question.
Okay.
When you did when Clarehouse did their 360, were they doing it for an effectiveness appraisal, or were they doing it for program development?
We did it for program development. It was my idea. I wanted to know what, I had been there 3 years, or 2.5, and I wanted to know what everybody thought about the program. I knew what they thought about it when I went in, because I interviewed a lot of different people the first month, and with informal interviews and sit-down interviews, formal ones, and I wanted to know what people thought about it now, 2.5 years later, now that we changed it with a new volunteer administrator. So, and we'll probably do it again in another year. Scott?
So because of your 360-degree evaluation, what has changed for you all? What did you guys implement?
What has changed for me specifically? That's a good question. Let me answer it by telling a short story. In my former life in the furniture business as a sales manager, and keeping in mind the company that I worked for, one of the things they wanted to do was just throw more people at the sales floor. So I'm thinking, well, based on my experience, I know that works in some ways. So the first couple of years, I recruited like crazy. And a couple of things went well and a couple of things didn't. And I thought, you know what? Throwing more bodies at the problem, is that really fixing the problem? And that was where the impetus came from to do the evaluation in the first place. So I wanted to see what programs were being affected well by more bodies, what programs didn't need more bodies and need more effective people. And I discovered that.
And so how did things change? How have things changed because of that now that you've discovered that?
Things have changed. We still have about the same number of volunteers, but our recruiting efforts are not as strong as they used to be. I'm learning to develop volunteers better, use them more effectively, and probably always will continue to learn how to develop volunteers and use them more effectively, so that the outcomes, which is what we're asking our donors to pay for, are more productive and more, more efficiently delivered. How's that?
Cool.
Guys, thanks so much.